The door slammed so hard it made the wooden floorboards under my feet rattle. I stood there on the porch, frozen, as the sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood. My 2 worn-out suitcases were dumped beside me like bags of trash that nobody wanted anymore. "Don't come back until you figure yourself out and start acting like you belong in this family," my mother snapped from behind the heavy oak door. I reached for the handle, my voice trembling as I shouted, "Mom, please, just listen to me for 1 second. I didn't do anything wrong." The only response I got was the sharp, metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. Silence followed, heavy and cold. My chest burned with a mix of shame and hot anger as I realized they were actually serious this time. They were choosing my brother's lies over my truth, again. I looked at my bags, then at the locked door, feeling smaller than I ever had in my entire life. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the driveway. I had no money, no car, and nowhere to go. I felt like the world was closing in on me. Then, 2 bright beams of light cut through the evening gloom. A sleek, black SUV pulled up slowly behind me and stopped. The engine of the SUV purred softly, a low rumble that I could feel in my chest. I shielded my eyes from the bright headlights, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The tinted window on the driver's side rolled down slowly, revealing a man in a sharp, gray suit. He looked professional, like someone who belonged in a high-rise office building, not in my parents' driveway. "Are you Harper Collins?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. I hesitated, clutching the handle of my suitcase tighter. "Yes, I am," I whispered, wondering if things were somehow about to get even worse. "My name is Mr. Whitaker," he said, offering a polite but stiff nod. "I represent your grandfather's estate. We have been trying to reach you for several weeks, but your primary phone line seems to be disconnected." I blinked in confusion. My grandfather? Arthur Collins? But he passed away 3 years ago. Mr. Whitaker met my eyes with a serious expression. "Yes, he did. And according to the final instructions in his will, he has left everything to you. We need you to come with us immediately. There are documents that require your urgent signature, and your presence is required at the main estate." My mind was racing. Why would a man I barely knew leave everything to me? I glanced back at the front door of the house. There was no movement behind the curtains. No one was coming out to apologize or pull me back inside. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a text from my mother. "Don't embarrass us further by standing out there. Go stay with a friend and think about your attitude." I swallowed hard, the last bit of hope I had for my parents dying right then and there. They didn't want me, but apparently someone else did. I looked back at Mr. Whitaker and the heavy black SUV. I didn't know where he was taking me, but it had to be better than sitting on a porch in the dark. I grabbed my bags, my movements quick and determined, and stepped toward the vehicle. Mr. Whitaker got out and opened the trunk for me, placing my suitcases inside with more care than my own father had shown. I stepped into the back seat, and the door shut with a solid, expensive thud. As we backed out of the driveway, I watched my childhood home disappear into the distance. Something in my life had just shifted, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the change. I was ready to leave the shadows behind. As the SUV sped away from the suburbs and toward the city, Mr. Whitaker handed me a thick folder filled with papers. The name at the top hit me like a physical blow. Arthur Collins. He was a man my parents had never allowed me to talk about. Whenever I asked about him as a child, my father would grow quiet and angry, saying that Arthur was a troublemaker who had turned his back on the family business. My mother would just sigh and tell me to focus on my studies. I grew up thinking he was a failure or someone to be ashamed of. "Why me?" I whispered, staring at a photo of a man who had the same dark hair and stubborn chin as I did. He had other grandchildren. My brother, Calvin, was always the favorite. Why wouldn't he leave his estate to the golden son of the family? Mr. Whitaker adjusted his glasses. "Your grandfather was a very observant man, Harper. He saw how your parents treated you. He saw how they favored Calvin and ignored your potential. He told me once that you were the only one with the backbone to actually run a legacy, not just spend it. He wanted to ensure you had the means to build your own life, away from their control. We arrived at a massive building downtown that I recognized as the headquarters of Collins Industries. My heart skipped a beat. This was the company my father had been trying to get a seat on the board of for decades. He always complained that the old man wouldn't let him in. We went up to the top floor, where a private office was waiting. The walls were covered in awards and photos of Arthur Collins shaking hands with world leaders. It was clear that my grandfather wasn't a troublemaker. He was a titan of industry. Mr. Whitaker sat me down and explained the situation. The estate included not just money, but a controlling interest in the entire company. Your parents think Arthur was broke because he stopped giving them allowances years ago, Whitaker explained with a small, knowing smile. In reality, he was reinvesting everything into a private trust for you. You are now the majority shareholder of Collins Industries. Your father and your brother are technically your employees if they want to keep their current positions in the satellite offices. I sat back, the room spinning. The people who just kicked me out for being a figured-out failure were now working for me. The irony was almost too much to handle, but I knew I had to stay calm. The next morning, I didn't wake up on a friend's couch. I woke up in a luxury hotel suite that Whitaker had arranged. I spent the morning in meetings with lawyers and financial advisors. They explained that my grandfather had left a video message for me. I sat alone in a small theater room as the screen flickered to life. There was Arthur, looking older but with eyes that were sharp and full of life. "Harper," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "If you are watching this, it means your parents finally pushed you too far. I'm sorry I wasn't there to stop it, but I've given you the tools to finish what they started." He talked about how my father, his own son, had become obsessed with appearance over substance. He warned me that they would try to crawl back the moment they realized I had the keys to the kingdom. "Don't be cruel, but don't be a doormat," he advised. "Build something that makes you proud, not something that makes them happy." The screen went black, and I felt a sense of clarity I had never known. I wasn't just a girl with a suitcase anymore. I was the head of a legacy. I called Whitaker and told him I wanted to visit the main office. It was time for a restructuring. While I was learning the ropes of my new life, my brother Calvin was having a great time at home. He was sitting in the living room, bragging to my parents about a big deal he was closing at the firm. "I'm telling you, Dad, once I get promoted to the main office, we won't have to worry about Harper's drama ever again. It was smart to kick her out. She was just dragging us down with her constant complaining about fairness." My father nodded, sipping his coffee. "You're right, son. You're the one who understands how this family works. Success is about loyalty and results." They had no idea that the main office Calvin was dreaming about was now my office. They didn't know that the SUV that picked me up wasn't a taxi, but a corporate vehicle sent by the estate. My mother walked in, looking a bit guilty as she glanced at the porch through the window. "I wonder where she went," she muttered. Calvin laughed. "Probably some cheap motel."
"Don't worry, Mom.
"She'll be back in a week, begging for forgiveness. And when she does, we'll make sure she signs over her remaining trust shares so I can use them for my new venture." Their greed was so predictable, it was almost sad. I spent the rest of the week in deep training. I had to learn how the company worked, from the factory floors to the executive suites. I realized that my brother had been padding his expense reports and taking credit for other people's work for years. He thought nobody was watching because our father was his direct supervisor. They were running the branch like a private club, using company funds for personal vacations and luxury cars. It was exactly what my grandfather had feared. I authorized a full internal audit. "I want every receipt, every contract, and every email from the last 5 years," I told the auditing team. They looked surprised but eager. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had noticed something was wrong at the branch office. As the data started coming in, the picture became clear. My family wasn't just mean. They were incompetent. They were bleeding the company dry to maintain their successful lifestyle. I felt a surge of cold determination. I wasn't going to just take over. I was going to fix the damage they had done. I scheduled a mandatory leadership meeting for the following Monday. I made sure the invitations were sent to every department head, including my father and Calvin. Monday morning arrived, and I felt like a completely different person. I was wearing a tailored suit that made me feel powerful, and my hair was pulled back in a sleek, professional style. I walked into the Collins Industries boardroom 10 minutes early. I sat at the head of the long, mahogany table, watching the city through the massive windows. One by one, the department heads filed in. Most of them didn't recognize me, or if they did, they assumed I was a new assistant. They chatted amongst themselves, unaware of the storm that was about to break. Then my father and Calvin walked in. They were laughing about something, looking confident and smug. They didn't even look toward the head of the table at first. They sat in their usual spots near the middle. "Who called this meeting?" my father asked loudly. "We have a busy morning." I cleared my throat, and the room went silent. I stood up slowly. "I did, Dad," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. The look on their faces was something I will never forget. Calvin actually dropped his leather portfolio, and my father's face went from a healthy tan to a ghostly white in 3 seconds flat. "Harper." Calvin stammered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be somewhere else. And why are you sitting in the chairman's seat? That's for the executive board only." I didn't flinch. I remained standing, my hands resting calmly on the table. "I am the executive board, Calvin. As of last Tuesday, I have taken over as the majority shareholder and CEO of Collins Industries. Mr. Whitaker here has all the legal documentation if you'd like to review it after the meeting." The rest of the room was dead silent. My father looked like he was having trouble breathing. "This is a joke," he hissed, leaning forward. "Arthur was broke. He told me he had nothing left. You probably faked those papers." Mr. Whitaker stepped forward from the corner of the room. "I assure you, Mr. Collins, the papers are very real. Your daughter is now your employer. I suggest you take your seat, so we can begin the presentation on the recent audit findings." I saw the veins in my father's neck start to bulge, but he sat down. He had spent his whole life worshipping power, and now that I had it, he didn't know how to fight me. Calvin just stared at me, his mouth hanging open like a fish out of water. I spent the next hour presenting the results of the audit. I didn't use an angry tone. I was purely professional. I showed slides of the missing funds, the falsified reports, and the unauthorized personal expenses linked to Calvin's department. The other department heads were whispering, looking at my brother with disgust. They had been working hard while he was stealing from their budgets. It was a complete humiliation for him, and he had nowhere to hide. "The branch office will be undergoing a complete restructuring," I announced, looking directly at my father. "All personal use of company assets will stop immediately. Any manager found to have participated in financial misconduct will be placed on administrative leave, pending a legal review." My father looked like he wanted to scream, but he knew that if he did, he would lose everything right then and there. I ended the meeting and asked my father and Calvin to stay behind. The other executives left the room quickly, probably racing to check their own departments for any mistakes before the auditors got to them. I sat back down, feeling the weight of the chair. It felt right. Once the door was closed, my father exploded. "How dare you? We are your parents. We raised you. You wouldn't even have a suitcase if it wasn't for us." I looked at him calmly. "You raised me to believe I was a failure, Dad. You raised me to believe that my voice didn't matter. And then, you locked me out on a porch in the dark because I wouldn't lie for Calvin. You didn't give me this suitcase, you threw it at me." He went quiet, the truth hitting him harder than any audit report ever could. Calvin tried a different approach. "Come on, Harper. We're family." So, I took a few vacations on the company dime. Everyone does it. Just bury the report, and let's move on. We can work together. Think about how powerful we'd be as a team. I looked at my brother and saw a stranger. "That's the problem, Calvin. We were never a team. You were the player, and I was the bench warmer you tripped on your way to the field. I'm not burying anything. You will return every cent you took, or I will hand this report over to the authorities. You have 24 hours to decide." I stood up and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. When I got to my hotel that night, I found a dozen missed calls from my mother. I finally answered, and she was crying. "Harper, please, your father is so upset. He says you're trying to destroy the family. We were just trying to help you grow, by being tough on you. We didn't mean to hurt you. I sighed, leaning against the window and looking at the city lights. Mom, locking your daughter out and calling her a failure isn't tough love. It's just being mean. You were trying to break me, not help me grow. She kept crying, telling me that they were worried about their reputation. What will our friends think if Calvin gets fired? People will think we're bad parents. I realized then that she still didn't care about me or the truth. She only cared about how things looked to her social circle. People will think you're bad parents because you were, Mom. If you want to fix your reputation, start by telling the truth about what Calvin did. Otherwise, I can't help you. I hung up and felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't the one carrying the burden of their shame anymore. It belonged to them now. 24 hours passed, and Calvin didn't return the money. Instead, he tried to leak a story to a local tabloid, claiming that I had stolen the company from my elderly grandfather through manipulation. He thought he could use the media to force me to step down. But he forgot one thing. Whitaker had been Arthur's lawyer for 30 years. He had every conversation, every meeting, and every medical record proving that Arthur was in his right mind when he signed the trust over to me. We didn't just ignore the tabloid. We sued them for defamation and released the full audit report to the public. The headline changed from Granddaughter Steals Company to Executive Caught Embezzling Millions from Family Legacy. The public backlash against Calvin was immediate and fierce. He was forced to resign from all his positions, and the board of directors voted unanimously to strip him of his remaining shares. My father was demoted to a low-level consultant role with no decision-making power. They had tried to play dirty, and they had lost everything in the process. I didn't feel happy about it, but I felt justified. With the family drama settling down, I finally had the chance to focus on the company itself. I spent my days meeting with the real workers, the people in the warehouses, and the mid-level managers who actually kept things running. I implemented new policies for fair wages, better benefits, and a merit-based promotion system. The energy in the building began to change. People stopped looking over their shoulders and started taking pride in their work again. I also started a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name for students who were the underdogs in their families. I wanted to find the kids who were being told they weren't enough and give them the suitcase they actually deserved. Whitaker became my closest advisor and a bit of a father figure. He told me that Arthur would have been incredibly proud of the way I handled the restructuring. He knew you had the heart for the people, Harper, Whitaker said one evening over dinner. That's why he left it all to you. He knew you wouldn't just rule, you would lead. I realized then that my grandfather hadn't just left me a company, he had left me a purpose. A few months later, I decided it was time to deal with the old family house. My parents couldn't afford the mortgage anymore without Calvin's subsidies and my father's full salary. They were facing foreclosure. My mother called me again, this time sounding desperate instead of angry. Harper, they're going to take the house. Everything we worked for. Please, you have so much now. Just pay off the debt for us. It's the house you grew up in. I drove out to the suburbs and sat in my car in front of the house for a long time. I looked at the porch where I had stood in the dark, feeling like the world had ended. I thought about the suitcases and the sound of the deadbolt. I realized that the house wasn't a home. It was a prison of bad memories. I didn't want to save it, but I didn't want to be cruel either. I called Whitaker and told him to buy the house through a holding company. I would let my parents stay there, but they wouldn't own it anymore. They would be my tenants, and the house would eventually be turned into a community center for the scholarship program. I was providing a roof over their heads, but I was taking back the power they had used to hurt me. I met my parents at a neutral location to tell them the news. They looked older and much more humble. My father wouldn't even look me in the eye. My mother kept nervously smoothing her dress. I bought the house. I told them, you can stay there for as long as you need, but you'll have to follow the rules of the holding company. No more luxury renovations, and no more using the address for Calvin's failed business ideas. My father finally spoke. You really hate us that much, don't you? To make us live in a house we don't own. I looked at him with a steady gaze. I don't hate you, Dad. I just don't trust you. You taught me that everything has a price, and this is the price of the way you treated me. You have a place to live because I am kind, not because you earned it. If you can't accept that, you are free to find a motel, just like you expected me to do." He went quiet again. They signed the papers. As they walked away, I felt the last string connecting me to my old life finally snap. I was free. The transformation of the company was a massive success. Our stock prices hit an all-time high, and we were being recognized as one of the most ethical companies in the country. I was invited to give a speech at a national business summit. I stood on a stage in front of thousands of people and talked about the importance of integrity over image. I shared a little bit of my story, not the names, but the lesson. Don't let the people who locked you out define the person you are inside, I told the audience. Your worth isn't measured by their approval, it's measured by your resilience. As I walked off the stage, I saw Whitaker waiting in the wings. He had a big smile on his face. "You did it, Harper. You've officially moved out of the shadow." I laughed and gave him a hug. I think I moved out of the shadow the moment I stepped into that SUV. I realized that my life wasn't a tragedy of rejection. It was an epic of self-discovery. I had been given a suitcase full of nothing, and I had turned it into a world full of everything. Calvin eventually moved to another state to try and start over, but his reputation followed him. Without the family name to shield him, he struggled to find high-level work. He sent me an email a few weeks ago, asking for a loan. I didn't give him money, but I offered to pay for a career counseling program and a financial management course. "I'll help you figure yourself out, Calvin," I wrote back. "But you have to do the work this time." He never replied. My parents stayed in the house, becoming much quieter and more private. They occasionally sent me cards for holidays and I sent them flowers, but we never went back to the way things were. I had built a new family out of the people I worked with and the friends who had supported me when I had nothing. I realized that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands by you when the porch lights go out. I was surrounded by people who saw me for who I actually was, not for what I could do for their reputation. I often think back to that Friday evening on the porch. The sound of the door slamming used to make me flinch, but now it just reminds me of how far I've come. I kept those 2 old suitcases in the back of my closet at the estate. Every once in a while, I pull them out and look at them. They are a reminder that you can start with nothing and still end up with everything you ever dreamed of. My grandfather's vision for the company is thriving, and I am finally the woman he knew I could be. I am not a figured-out failure. I am a leader, a survivor, and the CEO of my own destiny. The black SUV didn't just pick me up. It rescued the person I was always meant to be. And as I sit in my office today, looking out at the city, I know one thing for sure. The door is always open for those who have the courage to walk through it. I am Harper Collins, and I have finally figured myself out. I recently visited the old neighborhood to see how the house was doing. It had been turned into the Collins Community Center, and the yard was full of children playing and students studying on the porch. I saw a young girl sitting on the steps, looking a bit lost and holding a small backpack. I walked up to her and smiled. "Hey there, are you okay?" She looked up, her eyes a bit watery. "My parents said I have to spend the afternoon here because I'm too much for them to handle today." I sat down next to her. "I used to sit on these steps too," I told her. "And someone once told me that being too much usually just means you have a bigger world inside you than they know how to deal with. Don't let them make you feel small." She looked at me, a little bit of hope sparking in her eyes. "Really?" I nodded. "Really? Why don't we go inside and see what kind of big things we can find for you to do?" As we walked into the center together, I felt a deep sense of completion. I was using my porch to give someone else a seat at the table. Whitaker retired last month, and we had a big party for him at the office. He gave a speech about the history of the company, but he spent most of the time talking about the last 2 years. "I've seen a lot of leaders in my time," he said, looking at me, "but I've never seen someone lead with as much grace and strength as Harper. She didn't just take over a company. She gave it a soul." I walked him to his car after the party, a sleek black SUV, just like the one from that night. "Thank you for picking me up, Whitaker," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He squeezed my hand. "It was the best decision I ever made, Harper. Your grandfather knew what he was doing." As he drove away, I stood on the sidewalk and watched the taillights disappear. I wasn't standing in the dark anymore. The streetlights were bright, and the path ahead was clear. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to handle it. I am currently working on a new book about my journey. I want to share the lessons I learned about resilience and the importance of finding your own voice. I get letters every day from people who have felt locked out or ignored by their own families. I tell them all the same thing. Your suitcase might be empty now, but you have the power to fill it with whatever you want. Don't wait for them to open the door. Go find your own SUV. The company is moving into green energy now, a project I am incredibly passionate about. We are building the future, one innovation at a time. I am no longer defined by the rejection of my past. I am defined by the impact of my present. I am a woman who was kicked off a porch and ended up owning the building. And I wouldn't change a single second of the journey. Every slam of the door was just a drumbeat leading me to my own rhythm. Last night, I had dinner with my parents for the first time in a year. It was quiet and a bit stiff, but there was no more anger. They have finally accepted that I am the one in charge. My mother asked me about the scholarship program, and my father actually listened when I talked about the new energy project. They are learning to be parents to the woman I am, rather than the daughter they wanted me to be. It's not a perfect relationship, but it's a start. I realized that by standing my ground and demanding respect, I gave them the chance to actually grow too. We aren't the same family we were, and that's a good thing. We are something new, something more honest. As I left the house, my community center, I looked back at the porch. It didn't look scary anymore. It just looked like a place to start. I got into my car and drove home, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. I am sitting in Arthur's old office now, but it feels like mine. The sun is coming up over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. I have a meeting in 10 minutes with a group of young entrepreneurs who are looking for a partnership. I am excited to hear their plans and see the fire in their eyes. I am in a position to be the SUV for someone else, and that is the greatest gift of all. I look at the photo of Arthur on my desk. I think he would be happy with the way things turned out. I am not a troublemaker, and I am not a failure. I am Collins, and I am making the name stand for something meaningful again. My bags are no longer on a porch. They are in a home I built for myself. I am Harper Collins, and my story is just beginning. The door is locked, but I have the keys. And I'm never letting anyone lock me out again. I am whole.